I'm actually excited. I'm super excited for this. But I don't think everything lines up for me personally with things like the art style. And now we're going to talk about the art style of the game is doing something, obviously, that is completely different than Street Fighter. Even like just with a 30-second trailer that barely shows anything, we can pull a lot of conclusions about what Capcom's approach is here, because I've been in a lucky situation to have spoken to a lot of people that are in charge of like marketing efforts, a lot of people to have been on the side of Capcom marketing efforts for several years on games like Strider and Marvel 3 and even very early like Street Fighter 5 stuff, to directly talk to people and how they're approaching things. I have a lot of friends that are in these areas of development over the many years I've been around this industry. So I can tell you exactly where Capcom's coming from in this situation and why they are doing things this way. So this game doesn't look like Street Fighter. You know, it doesn't. It does not look anything like Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 4. And that is 100% intentional. Is this going to be something that is produced in the RE engine? Yes. Absolutely. There is very little reason for Capcom to be utilizing Epic Games Engine, right? To be utilizing Unreal for many of their titles anymore. They already have a graphics engine that produces fantastic, high-quality, next-generation visual fidelity, and they do not need to be paying Epic in general approximately like 20%, maybe even more per copy sold for using the engine. That's how expensive that shit is, man. If you use somebody else's engine and you don't have a proprietary engine, if you're using something else, every copy of the game sold is, you're losing a giant chunk to the essential contract of using somebody else's engine. So the Capcom at the time of Street Fighter 5 didn't have anything, man. Like a lot of what they were doing and the engine they were building was falling apart. All things considered, I don't think Capcom is in the business of using other engines anymore. They've obviously still have their MT framework engine that they use for like Mega Man, but even the other 2D games like Ghosts and Goblins, that's an RE engine game as well. You can definitely do other style games than just, you know, this, DMC5 or Resident Evil in something like RE engine. I think it's a really good call that what they're doing here, what you're seeing in this trailer, is essentially a demonstration that Capcom is saying, hey, RE engine is not just a Resident Evil pew 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 engine. We're going to be utilizing this for everything. This is our next generation engine. It's versatile, it works, and it's scalable. It works on Nintendo Switch, for God's sake, and it actually made Monster Hunter Rise even functional. A really complicated game, functional on a Nintendo Switch with very complex character rigs, you know? So this is like Capcom's statement, hey, our fighting game venture is going to be utilizing our own graphics engine. That's not official. I'm not saying that that's like they officially announced this, but there is some very distinct telltale signs that a lot of this stuff is RE engine, and that's what they're doing. It looks expensive. I think we can all pull that conclusion. This doesn't look like some budget fighting game that quite a few of previous Capcom's fighting game iterations have looked like, where the first like reveal of their fighting game looks kind of like, it looks a bit better than the previous game, or Jesus, that looks way worse. There is a pretty high level of visual clarity, and outside of Ryu's toes, you know, the really weird toe shot, this game looks like they're spending some money on it, which is good, because in all honesty, there hasn't been a big budget put into a Capcom fighting game since Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Street Fighter Cross Tekken was the last time Capcom fighting games actually had a good budget, and it was put mostly into a lot of the cinematic elements of the game, like trailers and music and stuff like that. And it didn't turn out great. It actually, I don't think eventually turned a profit. Was Street Fighter V's budget low? Yes. For anyone that doesn't know, Street Fighter V only existed because Sony stepped in and gave them budget to make the game. Street Fighter V was originally a game made by another studio called Polygon Studios, and they produced that really weird-looking Street Fighter V game, and then they scrapped it completely, and then had to go back and make another Street Fighter V super fast because they had to put out the game as soon as possible. And they got Sony money to do it. That's the really weird history of SF5 and why the game turned out the way it was. It was made pretty quick, and a lot of decisions and a lot of things were made very fast. And that's why, like, the reveal of it, like, when they first showed the game, it was just gameplay, you know? They didn't have time to put money into a ton of other stuff. Ever since Street Fighter V came out, from what I understand, and the people I've spoken to, Capcom made that entire game internally, right? They made all of that game in-house. outside of obviously some artists and stuff like that, right? So the majority of the development of their fighting games, including MVCI, was actually done internally. Capcom in its current state has way more developers, is a way bigger studio, and is doing astronomically better than when Street Fighter 4 was made, Marvel 3 was made, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and Street Fighter 5. The company is doing light years better financially and has so many more developers and divisions that are pumping shit out like at a high fidelity, at a good, at like an actual next generation look, and the games are selling well, you know? The only flub up in the past 5 years that Capcom has really had that is like truly a flub and outside of their fighting game division has been RE3. And RE3 still sold pretty good, right? RE3 is not like an absolutely awful game, but it's not the game that people wanted RE3 to be remade into, you know what I mean? And then MVCI, of course. Like, MVCI is obviously, in terms of fighting games, obviously one of the big missteps over the past 5 years. But everything else they've put out has been great, so the company's doing amazing. What I'm trying to get at is that the character models and what you're seeing in here, even though it is relatively early, Capcom just said, we are developing Street Fighter 6. That's all they said on their official press release I got in my email earlier today. All they pretty much say is that, yes, Street Fighter 6 is in development. Here is Ryu versus Luke. We'll see you in a few months type of thing. And all they're showing off is the fact that our characters' muscles have deformation. The lighting engine is ridiculous, right? Doesn't look great in every single way, but the characters are being produced in a graphical quality that rivals something like a NRS game. As much as people, like, I'm not saying it looks just like Mortal Kombat 11. I'm not saying that. My comparison is the only other fighting game out there that feels like it actually has a big game budget that I feel exists outside of Smash Brothers is NRS games. And regardless of what you feel about NRS games, right? NRS games really feel like, damn, they crank some money into this shit, dude. Holy crap. They believe in their market and they're going after it because look at this goddamn game. MK11 is the best looking fighting game there is. I don't think on the art style front it is. I think that still belongs to games like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Guilty Gear Strive. But if we're talking about raw graphical, like, geez, just look at what this game looks like, man. Mortal Kombat 11 is like the best looking fighting game there is in that regard. But when it comes to art style, I have completely different opinions, right? With what I think looks better in fighting games, I'm going to answer Guilty Gear Strive and Dragon Ball FighterZ 100%. You're not going to get me to go away from that. I think those are like the best looking fighting games, and even games like Grand Blue. Yeah, absolutely. The conclusion is that potentially, if every character is going to have this level of visual fidelity in their character models, if this is in engine, which it most likely is, and this is an actual character model that will be fighting, right? If that is the case, this is so much damn work that goes into a fighting game character model that it's kind of friggin' ridiculous. This is a lot of work. If that is true, I really want to know what other characters look like. Okay, so what does Chun-Li look like? What does Kemi's butt look like? Joking. I think the better way I can put it is that the entire roster of Street Fighter 6 might look like Devil May Cry / Resident Evil 2 characters. Potentially even better. At least in RE2 and Devil May Cry 5, you really have the environment to put the characters in and what they do, you know? So the environment's a big deal. In a fighting game, that's a different story. They can pump way more shit into every single character and how they look and what they are capable of on a character rig level, on a visual quality level, you know what I mean? It's almost like you're getting a whole roster of like Nero and Dante and like every other character that looks ridiculously good in a game like DMC5, but they're fighting game characters now. So they really are going to have even more shit they're going to have to do. I don't specifically agree with some of the shots in here because right now this trailer's intention is to show you, look how expensive this shit is, right? Look at how much money we are pumping into the sweat. And the fact that Ryu's back flexes in this shot and shit. Like everything in here is to reflect the fact that we are doing things with our characters that'll hopefully make it stand out from other Street Fighter games. It looks different. It doesn't look the same. Would I prefer this art style for a Street Fighter 6? No. If I had a choice and it was up to me to create a Street Fighter game like a next generation of Street Fighter, I'd go back in time, man. I'd bring our characters, make them younger, make them like 18, 19 years old, and return us to alpha in some way. 100%. It's still most likely going to be a 2.5D game. It's still most likely going to be Street Fighter by all regards, but they chose something completely different than what Alpha looked like in the past, what Street Fighter 3 looked like, and especially what Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5 looked like. This trailer seems like a statement that was intentional. And whether or not you like the fact that this characters look too beefy, I don't like Giga Chad Ryu. I don't the fact like the fact that Luke can look like a Twitch streamer. Even if you don't like some of those aspects, I think the fact that this game looks different than previous Street Fighters is more valuable than Ryu showing up and looking like Ryu in every fucking thing else. This is sort of a statement from Capcom in terms of its art style, right? Where they're choosing to do something that looks expensive and is going to absolutely differentiate itself from previous Street Fighter games. And I said this before in a game like Guilty Gear Strive. And I hate to break it to you guys that it worked. Most of the time when games do this, it does end up working. To my behest as well at moments, and it kind of burns. Usually developers, when they're out to go make something new, and they're out to change something, are willing to let go a part of their core audience in order to build a much wider audience. And we talked about this with Guilty Gear. And Guilty Gear was a game that was willing to change and adjust its gameplay to let go a part of its core audience in order to build more people in. They were willing to change substantial things about the way their game plays in order to reach new people. We're gonna leave these guys behind. Just sorry, guys. You know what? You have our older games and just enjoy it. It hurts. I know this hurts, but this is the way conversations go. And then they're gonna try to bring in all of these new people. And that trade-off usually works. Here is the other brutal breakdown that I have for a lot of people. Street Fighter 4 sold really well because it was Return of Fighting games, right? And it was definitely unique looking. Its art style has not aged the best over the years, but it's definitely unique looking. And it was in 2008. Not many fighting games look that way. They were going for something absolutely different, which is good. Street Fighter 5 essentially felt like Street Fighter 4, but better, right? It just felt like kind of they're doing the same thing, but more. The harsh reality about appealing to a wider audience is the fact that most of the time, unless you're attached to a really huge franchise, we're talking like if you're a Dragon Ball thing, maybe Marvel or something like that, if you have a cartoony / like anime art style for a lot of games, unless you're attached to something really big, it might not sell super well. The general audiences or the wider scale audiences really get attached to things looking as realistic as possible. And you might think like, what about Tekken 7? Tekken 7 does that. Tekken 7 tries to go for as realistic looking visuals as possible. Granted, Tekken 7 looks a lot more real than Street Fighter 5 does, you know? There's a good reason why Mortal Kombat 11 wows the shit out of people. There's a good reason why Mortal Kombat in general has always pulled in a big audience. Because from the very inception of Mortal Kombat, their game plan has been, we want to make our shit look as realistic as possible. We want to scan real humans and put them into the game, you know? That was the beginning of it. And now they're at the point where they're scanning real humans and putting them into MK11, and suddenly it looks ridiculous. It's like, geez, man, now it looks even crazier. I don't think they're exactly doing that with Street Fighter 5. I don't think Luke and Ryu over here look like they could be real people necessarily, you know? Not Giga Chad aside, I don't know. I think Luke still looks pretty dang stylized in a lot of these shots. In fact, I think some of these moments of like the character effects going off and all this stuff looks pretty great, and really a great mix of like crazy stylization and like hyper realism, what they're sort of going for here. I think it's a good mix. It still feels like it's something sort of unique and new, and that's the most important thing. Most important thing is that they're trying to get something that has an identity. They're going for mass appeal. They're going for the fact that we want to bring in a new audience, and we want to, unfortunately, piss off a little bit of the core audience. And here's the other thing. Weirdly enough, leaves me kind of excited about where this is going, and it's the audio.
You ready? Street Fighter 6.
So, the logo sucks, right? However, the combination of the music choice is very deliberate. You don't just put any rando song into a game, and much less even the way the announcer sounds.
Street Fighter 6.
All of this stuff is super intentional. In fact, people have been working months putting this stuff together, finding the exact moment, finding all the best elements to put this stuff together. You know what I mean? I think this might be the only other opportunity that Street Fighter could potentially be leaning towards a thematic hip-hop style game since Third Strike. I don't mean just the logo. The logo itself causes big issues with me. I mean, the way a lot of these elements are presented feels like it maybe they're leaning in that direction. And a lot of you would be asking, what about Third Strike was hip-hop? Well, not a ton, right? Just some things allowed the game to have a unique feel, right? Third Strike feels so different than every other Street Fighter game just due to a few things throughout its presentation that really give it this identity that make it feel different than any other Street Fighter game. And that's really important because that feel of Third Strike, of what Third Strike is like built into the core of the game. And you don't even realize it. It's the stuff your brain does, right? It's wonderful. It's one of the reasons why Third Strike is so appealing, because it's so different than every other Street Fighter. I'm not saying this is going to be Third Strike 2. I'm not. I'm not saying this is going to be like a UFC game. I'm not. I'm saying that what is present in this trailer leads me to think that if these choices are the way they are, they might be leaning in a hip-hop direction for the game, which is actually kind of cool, because guess what that is? It's an actual direction, you know? Instead of just being, oh, we're just going to be the modern-day Street Fighter 2, bringing back to its roots, right? That's kind of what Street Fighter 4 was. We're going back to the roots of Street Fighter. Street Fighter 5 was kind of like, we're going back to the roots of Street Fighter again. What? This game is not. They're not. They are seemingly going in different directions visually and different directions thematically, which I think is a good call. I mean, this dude, regardless of how you feel about him, is going to be at the forefront of it in some way or another. The fact that it's not Ryu and Ken is interesting, but when Luke's like effect stuff shows up, here's another conclusion we can pull off of. It's like a mixture of the previous Street Fighter stuff, right? The ink effects, but it almost looks more graffiti-like on Luke in some ways. And then you get over to Ryu, and Ryu has a completely different style, right? This is when you make a trailer, chat, this is all super intentional. Ryu's style is dramatically different. In fact, you've seen this style of Street Fighter before. Ryu comes from the olden times, right? Ryu comes from this era where things look like this. And literally the visual style of Ryu almost like is identical to the Street Fighter 4 initial reveal trailer. Like almost shot for shot looks like this stuff, you know? The thematic difference between Ryu and Luke having two very different visual styles, I think is going to be a big thing throughout the game. So all I'm saying is that I feel like potentially this conflict of styles is probably going to be a big thing throughout the game. I don't know if it means anything gameplay-wise. I don't. But the combination of like the hip-hop elements that are present in this trailer, sort of like the very different, like he looks like it's from a Kurosawa film, and then Luke is obviously meant to represent, you know, the modern take of what a modern Street Fighter character is in some way. I think that's kind of interesting what they're going to be going for. And I really hope that this isn't just trailer shit, right? I really hope that these effects and stuff, because this is kind of neat, all like the comic book filter and look at all the lines and shit. This is actually kind of fucking cool. It looks like, once again, it looks like Luke became graffiti art, and then it suddenly looks like Ryu became Japanese calligraphy. Kind of dope. I kind of, outside of just his creepy Spider-Man smile, I kind of think it's cool looking. So I'm curious what other characters are going to look like. What is Chun-Li going to look like? What is Ken going to look like? Ken's obviously going to be fire of some kind, right? It's going to be a conflict of styles all over the place, sort of brought together by maybe a hip hop theme, which is literally what's happening in the trailer.
You ready?
And sweet Jesus, do I hope it actually looks like that in game.